that if the Palestinian Authority is actually right or true in its indignation about what Trump has done, it must be dissolved first and foremost, and it must declare that the Oslo Accords are null.
Juan Orlando Hernandez was trailing opposition candidate Salvador Nasrallah, who's now calling on the military to stop the crackdown on protesters.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on over 30 cable stations from Vermont to New York City and points west. Today, Palestine, Syria, Honduras, Timothy Snyder, and an unusual rendition of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. President Trump has enthusiastically adopted the Israeli demand that the U.S. move its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Even the Palestinian Authority admits that their 20-year effort to negotiate with the U.S. and Israel to create a Palestine alongside Israel has come to an end. Unfortunately, the PA has no plan B. But luckily, the new generation sees things much more clearly, especially blind activist, journalist Budour Hassan, who lives in Jerusalem. She appeared on Democracy Now! This week. First, she cleared the air. She explained that Palestinian anger is not just against President Trump.
We obviously, while we are outraged, we know the reason for our outrage is not just Trump's declaration. Our reason for our outrage is that it was under President Obama that the U.S. pledged $38 billion of U.S. taxpayers' money to support Israel militarily. So this is why we are outraged. We are outraged because the Palestinian Authority continued to sell people the promise of negotiations and peace, and the result is that all these talks about peace and negotiations and the peace process that has been going on for more than 2 decades has only led us to this. And
she has a plan B. Dissolve the Palestinian Authority and repudiate the useless Oslo peace process.
It's a bet. We know that this is a battle to reclaim to liberate our country, and also to dissolve the PA, because we believe, and many protesters have said that today, and will continue to say that if the Palestinian Authority is actually right or true in its indignation about what Trump has done, it must be dissolved first and foremost, and it must declare that the Oslo Accords are null, and it also must strip Israel of its recognition. Only when the Palestinian Authority does that, we can talk about the possibility of rebuilding a national movement. But meanwhile, we cannot take the anger of the PA seriously while it continues to recognize Israel and the legitimacy of the Israeli state.
And she understands what needs to be done. Instead of groveling to the State Department and Netanyahu, mass popular struggle, like the successful actions for Al-Aqsa this summer.
What's going to happen over these next few days that you know of, Budour?
I'll tell you something. In July, when Israel introduced metal detectors outside Al-Aqsa Mosque, people, without waiting for leaders, without waiting for anyone, neither religious nor political leaders. It was young women and men, religious, secular, Muslim, Christian, atheists, some people who never prayed in their lives before, took to the streets and camped outside Al-Aqsa Mosque. And after 2 weeks of popular rebellion that was leaderless and that was grassroots, they managed to topple the metal detectors, and they managed to, probably for the first time, defeat an Israeli plan in Jerusalem Jerusalem, and it was them who imposed their decision on the Israeli administration. And I believe that people in Palestine say, of course, the days of rage are important, and we expect that tomorrow there will be protest. But we also know that this is a long struggle. I mean, some people will probably forget, but people in Jerusalem have been suffering from colonization and from repression, especially extreme repression for the last 2 years.
In Syria, Assad, Russia, and Iran keep hundreds of thousands of Syrians under siege. Now a minute for 2 messages from some hungry Syrian children. We did the best we can with the subtitles.
Hello, I have the right to play. I have the right to go to school. I have the right to eat. We are deprived from food. I have the right to live like children in the world. Stop hunger, save children.
Hello.
Hello.
Our schools since 13 days closed because of bombing.
We made it.
Let's not forget them. And if you're in the New Haven area Wednesday, December 13th, come to the showing of Hell on Earth, a movie about Syria, in the Marriott Room of the New Haven Library at 6 p.m. Now to the country of Honduras, where tens and hundreds of thousands of people are in the streets to try to prevent the U.S. and the dictatorship from foiling the election of a new president. Again, reporting from Democracy Now!
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we continue on the crisis in Honduras, where tens of thousands of protesters poured into the streets Sunday to denounce alleged election fraud and to support opposition presidential candidate Salvador Nasrallah. Last week, the Electoral Commission pausing the counting of the votes when the incumbent president, Juan Orlando Hernandez, was trailing opposition candidate Salvador Nasrallah, who's now calling on the military to stop the crackdown on protesters. We're joined by Honduran human rights activist Zenaida Velasquez. She's one of the founders of the Committee of Relatives of the Disappeared in Honduras. Her sister, Ilse Velasquez, was a teacher who was killed during a demonstration in March 2011. Her brother, Manfredo Velasquez, was abducted and disappeared by Honduran security forces decades ago in 1981. Joining us from Honduras is Matt Ginsberg-Jekyll, one of the founding members of the Honduras Solidarity Network, a member of the group La Voz de los de Abajo, and a longtime friend of murdered environmental organizer Berta Cáceres, who welcome you both to Democracy Now! I'm going to begin with Zenaida Velasquez. What do you understand is happening right now, and what are you calling for, Zenaida?
Morning, Amy. What is happening is the risk of a general strike in the entire country, because they are opposing all this curfew that certainly is mostly a coup d'etat. And so the possibility of having a general strike, because people say if they are imposing this curfew to us from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., so let's us act from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. and do a general strike that we have to stop this rigged electoral vote, these blatantly rigged electoral results. It's incredible how they have hacked the system 3 times, and then all of a sudden when they reactivate the system, Juan Orlando is ahead of Salvador Nasrallah. This is completely outrageous. It's blatant, really, that they are talking about this when on Sunday, actually Monday, early morning, about 2 a.m., finally the first results were given, and Salvador Nasrallah was winning for 5 points after counting 67% of the acts. And then the rest, 33%, was going to be done the rest of the days. And it's a week already, it's more than a week already, and they are still playing with those results.
And amazingly, a revolt on the part of police and troops sent to enforce a state of siege in Honduras.
On Monday night, National Police in the capital, Tegucigalpa, including elite U.S.-trained units, refused to impose a nighttime curfew ordered by the government after days of protests over allegations of fraud in the country's disputed election for president. This is one of the Cobra's anti-riot squad speaking in a video posted on Facebook.
This is a message for the violence to end. There is no need for people to be in the streets killing each other for something the politicians can resolve among themselves. It is not our job. We are not acting according to any political ideology. This is our feeling. Most of my colleagues are tired of being in the streets. Our families have been locked at home for more than 15 days. And the problem continues every day. The crisis continues. Our call is that all this ends, because we are not willing to come to the streets and confront the people or engage or repress the people, crack down on the people.
The move by police comes after at least 3 people were killed as Honduran security forces opened fire on demonstrators Friday night in Tegucigalpa. Protests erupted last week when the government-controlled Electoral Commission stopped tallying votes from the November 26th election, and after the count showed opposition candidate Salvador Nasrallah ahead by more than 5 percentage points. The commission now says President Hernandez has pulled ahead of Nasrallah by 42.98% to 41.39%, with 99.96% of the votes tallied. Electoral officials say they will not declare a winner in the election yet in order to allow the filing of challenges and appeals. This comes as international observers are calling on the Honduras Electoral Commission, which is controlled by President Hernandez, to carry out a recount. The Organization of American States and the European Union have supported Nasrallah's demands for a recount. This is Marisa Matias, head of the European Union mission.
The count has not yet finished. The process is far from over. That is to say, there's still some time for the presidential candidates and for the parties to put forward their appeals, their challenges. This should be done by the Supreme Electoral Tribunal.
This comes as the U.S. Embassy said in a statement, it's, quote, pleased Honduran election authorities completed the special scrutiny process in a way that maximizes citizen participation and transparency, unquote. Meanwhile, here in New York, people rallied in Union Square Monday in solidarity with those supporting Nasrallah.
My name is Carla Garcia. I live in New York, and I'm standing here today together with my Honduran community. It doesn't matter if you are indigenous, Garifuna, or a person who lives in the city. We are all facing a fraudulent election where one person is trying to continue ruling with his party, trying to continue governing indefinitely. And the people are saying, no more. We want liberty. That's why I'm here, accompanying the Honduran people.
Now more of Timothy Snyder's speech for promoting enduring peace. Snyder is an eminent historian and the author of On Tyranny.
Okay, so that was the first thing I wanted to talk about, what the book is. The second thing, where am I coming from? Where does this book come from? It comes from Europe, and it arrives here, right? It comes from the fact that I spent the last 25 years mainly learning languages, reading sources so that I could write about the Holocaust, so that I could write about Soviet terror, so I could write about the worst atrocities of the 20th century, which means that for me, the it in Can It Happen Here is not a hypothetical or a fictional it. That's an it in which I live, right, mentally. The it of republics falling, atrocities happening, is I spent more time in that it than I spent in this very nice it in the last couple of decades. So I take for granted that the it can happen because of what I work on. Now, I work on those subjects, or I could work on those subjects, because I had teachers, many of them from Eastern Europe, most of whom had some contact with or grew up under communism, some of whom, as it turned out later, were survivors of the Holocaust. And from these people, something else came to me. It's so obvious and clear that it's barely a lesson, but I'll just say it out loud anyway, that the it happens to people like us, right? So that if I was taught by a survivor of the Warsaw Ghetto, and I'm talking to you, that means we're all communicating with one another. It's all people like us. And then the third place this book is coming from is this. I'm not as old as you think I am, but I am old enough to have had, well, it's reached the point with my undergraduates, it's like, it's like with kids, like you ask kids how old an adult is, and they're like, 150, right? Yeah. Okay. No, I mean, I remember the good old days when I had seen the same movies as my undergraduates and things like that, right? Like that, okay, that's past. Although I can make cool Wonder Woman references. I'll try to work that in. Okay, so where was I? So I try to learn from my students, and because I work on East European history, many of my students are people who come from Russia or come from Ukraine or come from Poland. And if you think about their experience in life, if they were born in, say, 1989 or 1995 or 2000, their experience in life is not that, as was promised to them, freedom was going to approach them, right? The experience in most of Eastern Europe after 1989 has not been automatic freedom or ever-increasing freedom. If you were born in 89 or 95 or 2000, in Eastern Europe, the experience of your life has very likely been the opposite. It's very likely been the consolidation of wealth, very likely been the consolidation of authoritarian rule. And what that means is that I have things to learn from these people. So unfortunately, it's the case that a lot of my students now, like a lot of my teachers, have been in camps or have been tortured or in a couple of cases have been killed. And it is from those experiences that I'm trying to learn. Many of the lessons in this book, in fact, many of the terms in this book, come from people who are a generation or more younger than I am. So special welcome to you. And it's especially important because it means, the it can happen. The it can happen to people like us, and the it is already happening. Right? The it is already happening. The specific reversal of the Western order that we take for granted, it was already happening before Mr. Trump was elected president of the United States. It was these same processes were already well underway. People were already engaging with them, and so we have things to learn from them. Which brings me to the third lesson, which is beware the one-party state. So, depending upon your own political tastes and preferences, a one-party state might sound like bad fascism to you, or it might sound like bad communism to you. But let's just agree for the moment provisionally that a one-party state is not such a wonderful thing. The one-party state is on the way back. The one-party state is on the way back. And the way the one-party state is coming back in the 21st century is not by way of revolution. Nobody has to march on Rome anymore. Nobody has to carry out a revolution with an ideology anymore. Most of the time now when an authoritarian regime is founded, it's founded electorally. There's some election back there in the past which was more or less fair, like, I don't know, 2010 in the US or whatever. There's an election somewhere in the past which is more or less fair, and then there's one which is a bit less fair, and then there was one which was a bit less fair, then maybe there was one under conditions of emergency, and so slowly, step by step, you end up in a place where democracy is a sham and nobody believes in their own vote. But it's not clear exactly when that happened. And this is usually accompanied by the generation, by variance on suppressing the vote. I mean, like every family is unhappy in a different way, right, says Tolstoy. The vote is suppressed in different ways in every country, like it reveals something about national style, how votes are suppressed, right, switching Russian authors. One way that votes are suppressed in Russia is that they add They add what are called dead souls, so votes that don't actually correspond to a living human being, right? That was a global reference. They add, that's specific to Russia, right? We don't, I guess we probably will start doing that sometime soon, but the point is that suppression of voting or manipulation of voting comes along with this territory. Another thing which comes along with this territory in the 21st century is political fiction. It's not political fiction of the old utopian kind, right? Nobody is promising nobody's promising socialist utopia. Nobody is promising fascist utopia, or not very many people anyway. Instead, what's being offered is a steady stream of stuff which is not only not true, but stuff which opens an aperture into an alternative reality, right? Creates a sort of fiction in which you can live, a fiction which makes you distrustful of other people who aren't living in your fiction. This is how it works in the 21st century. All of that was by way of lesson 3, which is beware the one-party state. The one-party state is a temptation, right? Let's now put it graciously. It's a temptation to those who have perhaps more power than they ought to have electorally. It's a temptation. It's one that everyone has to watch out for. Okay, lesson 4, take responsibility for the face of the world. Lesson 5, remember professional ethics. Lesson 6, be wary of paramilitaries. Lesson 7, be reflective if you must be armed. Lessons 6 and 7 are about the practical side of regime change in the 30s and 40s. It's extremely important that the exercise of violence not escape the bounds of the state. That's how the Nazi transition took place, that paramilitaries blurred the boundary of what was unofficial and what was official violence. And I don't need to dwell on the details of what that would look like in the United States. On the other side, it's very important that official organs of violence, the police, the army, don't blur the boundaries going in the other direction, right? So these are obvious historical lessons. Lesson 8 is stand out. Now, stand out is one that I don't have to dwell on in front of this group, but I'm going to anyway because I like it so much. Stand out is about how freedom is awkward. So, it's a little bit like peace. Peace is really hard work. Peace is really hard work. I mean, people who like violence think peace is the easy thing. No. Peace is the hard thing. Violence is the easy thing. Freedom is like that. People think freedom is easy because they think freedom is just kind of like saying the word freedom over and over again. Freedom is really hard. Standing out is hard. Doing the thing that's different from what everyone else is doing is difficult. In America, we think we're free when we're doing the stuff that everyone else is doing, and that's how the word freedom is used colloquially in America. The word free means you're doing the stuff other Americans are doing. That's what free means in American English. You're doing the same. But that's not what freedom really is. Freedom is that feeling of awkwardness. It's that feeling of doing something that maybe you shouldn't be doing because not everyone else is doing it. And if one doesn't have that feeling, then one is not, I'm convinced, a free person, right? That's what standing out means. So, all right, so that's lesson 8. Third thing I wanted to talk about, what do I think is happening, okay? Now, I will very happily get as deep into the details of the present day as you want, but what I want to do in questions, but what I want to do here is just give a kind of general overview and introduce some concepts that maybe are useful. I think what is happening is that we're shifting from a politics of inevitability to a politics of eternity. So I'm a historian, I think everything is about time, so bear with me. I think there are basically 3 kinds of politics that are at work. Politics of inevitability, politics of eternity, and politics of responsibility. Politics of inevitability is the idea that we know what the future is going to be. We just have to push a few buttons. So, for example, here's you'll get it if I put it like this. A right-wing version of the politics of inevitability says nature brings the market brings democracy, so there's nothing to worry about. There are no alternatives. Right? As Maggie Thatcher put it, there are no alternatives. That's the politics of inevitability version. There are many left-wing versions, but a left-wing version would be something like, the arc of history is long, but bends towards justice. I mean, I wish that were true. It's beautiful, but it's not. There is no arc. It doesn't bend. It's all down to us, really.
We close with a fun protest of a serious problem. On the night that New Haven had its annual light up of the Christmas tree, activists trying to get the city to take its money out of fossil fuel investing Wells Fargo Bank did their own carol of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
You know Citibank, TD Bank, Chase Morgan Stanley, there's Bank of America, Deutsche Bank, Barclays. But do you recall the most infamous bank of them all? Wells Fargo has our money, and it's plain for all to see that what it's really funding is more than just a Christmas tree. It's like wine to make insurance, loaning mortgages on homes. Wells Fargo should know better. People can't afford their loans. Payments, detention centers, bank accounts and other lies. New Haven needs Wells Fargo. Now that you have gotten wise, then one Fargo Christmas Eve, Santa came to say, Mayor Harp, you'll shine so bright if you'll guide our city right. Out of Wells Fargo we'll go, so we're shouting out with glee. New Haven, move your money, you'll go down in history. Then one Fargo Christmas Eve, Santa came to say, Mayor Harp, you'll shine so bright if you'll guide our city. Out of Wells Fargo we'll go, shouting out with me. New Haven, move your money, you'll go down in history.
Could you explain that check?
Well, Wells Fargo is bankrolling the lighting of the tree tonight to the tune of $15,000 to the city of New Haven. And we just want to bring attention to the fact that, first of all, New Haven has our tax money in Wells Fargo Bank, and secondly, Wells Fargo Bank, to the tune of $467 million, is funding dirty oil, the Dakota Access Pipeline, destruction of local communities, dirty oil, and the desecration of sacred lands throughout the country. So we want to make sure that Wells Fargo and the Mayor Harp gets the message that we need to have our money from the city of New Haven taken out of Wells Fargo Bank and put in a local bank that's using it responsibly.
That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle.